What if I told you that thousands of men once fought a war and the most famous thing they took home was a wooden bucket? This is the story of the War of the Bucket, a conflict so ridiculous on the surface and so complicated underneath that its roots goes back 250 years ago, involving popes, emperors, betrayal, and one of Italy's biggest upsets. Pour yourself some tea, because they don't teach history like this in your school. But between me, you, and this statement, we're going to change that. Welcome to the ancient tea. To understand why a bucket became one of history's most famous trophy, we need to travel all the way back to 1075, 250 years ago. Europe wasn't made of modern countries, and Italy was a patchwork of cities, castles, and rivalry lords. But two men wanted power over all of it. One wore the crown, and the other wore a white robe. On one hand was Pope Gregory VII, leader of the Catholic Church. On the other hand was Emperor Henry IV, ruler of the Holy Roman Empire. During the Middle Age, the kings and emperor appointed bishops. Bishops weren't just priests. They controlled land, taxes, castle, some even commanded soldiers, and had major political influence. If the emperor appointed the bishop loyalty is definitely with him, giving the emperor enormous power. Think of appointing a bishop more of like appointing a governor, and both men wanted that power. In 1075, Pope Gregory VII declared the bishop are church officials, and only the church should be able to appoint the bishop. He believed the church should be independent from kings and emperor, and the pope should even be able to depose an emperor. Doing too much, don't you all think so? This declaration gave massive shock in Europe, whereas Emperor Henry IV bluntly refuses. He debates that the bishop rules land and collects taxes inside his empire, so it's only right for him to be able to appoint the bishop. Fair play, don't you all think? And just like that, two men declared war on each other. The investitude controversy war of 1075 began, a political and religious power struggle that will reshape Italy for centuries. During the war, things got so bad that Pope Gregory VII excommunicated Henry IV, the emperor. Being excommunicated was terrifying. He gets cut off from the church. His subjects were no longer required to obey him. Nobles began turning against the emperor. Emperor Henry IV feared losing his throne and did the unexpected. In 1077, he crossed the Alif and stood outside Canosa's castle for 3 days, barefoot in the snow, begging the Pope for forgiveness. Imagine an emperor standing outside, waiting to be let in. The Pope forgave him. Think of it, this is just an humbling experience for the emperor, greatly increasing the prestige of the papacy. I'm sure you all thought the emperor was defeated, but the fight wasn't over. Later on in 1084, Henry IV invaded Italy and occupied Rome. He forced Pope Gregory to flee, and unfortunately, Pope Gregory died in exile. It's safe to say Henry IV later got his lick back. Decades later, in 1122, the church and the emperor had finally reached a compromise. A new pope, a new emperor, Pope Calixtus II, and Emperor Henry V, son of late Henry IV, signed a peaceful agreement called the Concordat of Worms, which states that the pope will be able to appoint the bishop spiritually, but the emperor could still grant them political powers and land. From a layman point of view, this gave the papacy the larger victory, and the church became more independent from the emperor. But the emperor didn't disappear from Italy's politics. It simply changed forms. Because this agreement had already done something more dangerous, it had divided Italy into two camps. People started asking, who should Italy follow, the Pope or the Emperor? And two groups emerged. Imagine them as political parties. The first group was called the Guelphs. They supported the Pope, the papal authority, and the greater independence from imperial control. They were wealthy, had fertile land, large populations, and merchants. Cities like Bologna, Florence, Lucca, and other cities were influenced by this group. The second group was called the Ghibellines. They supported the emperor, the imperial authorities, and traditional rights of emperor. They had strong military power and imperial control. Cities like Modena, Pisa, Mantua, and Siena influenced this group. However, things wasn't just plain Jane. Cities like Milan and other cities often switched sides. Family fought one another. Politics became violent. This increased political tension among cities in Italy, majorly these two cities, Bologna and Medina. These two cities in Italy already had local disputes. They argued over land, trade, castle, borders, and now also had religion and politics dividing them. Their rivalry became personal, and to make it worse, the struggle of power between the Pope and the Emperor divided them. The wealthy city of Bologna became fiercely Guelphs, firmly supporting the Pope, whereas their rivalry, Medina, became proudly Ghibellines, supporting the Emperor. Then came one man, Passarino Bonaccosi, the most powerful Ghibelline leader in Italy, the ruler of Medina and Mantua, a loyal and one of Europe's strongest allies in northern Italy, an ambitious politician, and surprisingly talented military leader, and friend of Emperor Louis IV. Pope John XXII believed Emperor Louis IV was interfering in Italy and challenging the papal authorities. Passarino openly supported the emperor. He expanded the Ghibelline influence and threatened the papal alliance in northern Italy. The Pope declared him a rebel and excommunicated him. Passarino didn't care. In fact, he was about to make things much worse. In September of 1325, a strategic castle called Montevigello is a certified hill town. Think of it as a military checkpoint. The castle controlled the roads and defended the frontier. The castle belonged to the Bolognese, but some nobles inside secretly supported Medina. So one night, they opened the gates and handed the fortress to Passanerum. No massive siege, no dramatic battle, just betrayal. Bologna was furious. To Bologna, this was treason. For Medina, this was a victory. This was basically the cherry on top. This was the spark that led to a full-blown war. Bologna assembled enormous army, around 30,000 men, and Medina only around 7,000, 4 times smaller. The result seemed obvious. Medina should have been crossed, but history had other plans. Over centuries, these two cities have always been fighting. As we said earlier, they fought over every little thing. On November 15, 1325, the armies met at a small village called Zappolino. Passarino men had better cavalry, more experienced soldiers, and they fought on the terrain that limited Bologna massive's number. They came in charge. The Bolognese line first began to break. A few men ran, then more, then everyone. What started as a retreat became panic, and the panic became disaster. Against all the odds, Modena won. The victorious soldiers chased the fleeing army almost all the way back to Bologna. Then, according to tradition, they took something with them, a wooden bucket, a simple bucket from a well, not gold, not a crown, a bucket, and it became a trophy. Did thousands of men fight because of a bucket? No, the bucket didn't start the war. The war started because of a pope, an emperor, a century-old struggle over power, political fraction, bitter rivalry states, and a betrayed castle. The bucket was simply the punchline. But not everyone agrees. Over the centuries, stories began to spread that the bucket had been stolen before the war and had actually caused the conflict. Here's the craziest part. A wooden bucket is still kept in Medina today. It is displayed near the bell tower of the Medina Cathedral. However, historians aren't completely sure if it's the exact original bucket from 1325 or a later replacement. But to the people of Medina, the bucket is a symbol of one of their greatest victories. Imagine winning a war so badly that your enemy's bucket becomes a national treasure. In 1600, an Italian poet named Alessandro Tassano changed everything. He wrote in his poem La Secchia Rapita, which means the stolen bucket. The poem joked that thousands of men had gone to war over a bucket. People loved the story, and eventually the joke became more famous than the real story. Today, when most people hear the war of the bucket, they don't think about popes, emperor, or castle. They think about one wooden bucket. And honestly, that is probably exactly how Tassoni would have wanted it. A bucket may have not started the war, but it definitely stole the spotlight. And that is today's tea. Please remember to like, comment, and push the subscribe button so we can have more tea. And remember, your questions in the comment section are always spoken about in Hot Tea Take episodes.